So our next speaker is Irun Cohen, Emeritus Professor of Immunology at the Weizmann Institute of Science. And he's going to talk us about an informational view of the evolution of living systems. So let me just say that there are many philosophers here working on how information is used in science, me included, and I think it's a great pleasure and a great opportunity to have an actual scientist talking about these notions. So, yeah.
Thank you very much. As you can all see from the first PowerPoint slide, I was trained as a physician, actually a pediatrician, and I'm a professor of immunology, so my professional career has been doing experimental immunology and thinking about how the immune system works. And I'm here talking about information and evolution to what looks like preponderance of philosophers. Probably had I heard the first two talks, I would have redone my own talk, but we'll carry on. The bottom line is that from my point of view, my observations of health, disease, human development, and the immune system, it has come I've come to the conclusion that the Neo-Darwinian paradigm of evolution being driven by survival of the fittest is inadequate to describe what we now know, or at least what I now know about biology. And what I'm going to describe is how, by looking at living systems as examples of information, I can satisfy myself that some of the, let's say, some of the inadequacy of Darwin and his followers to explain what we know about living systems can be understood, at least to my satisfaction, thinking about information. So if we, taking apart the Darwinian or the Neo-Darwinian approach, Darwin didn't know anything about genes, but combining the synthesis, there's a genetic program. This is the standard Neo-Darwinian view of evolution. With variation, it's important, but the critical thing is that the phenotype is an expression of the genotype. And as you'll see, the genotype is decoded to produce a phenotype. The phenotype through individual struggle, autonomous individuals struggling within a particular environment. Only the fit or the fit survive best, and that leads to the enrichment of the species with optimal genes or more optimal genes that lead to a improved phenotype, and then there's variation and there's iteration of the process. That's the standard view. It's been a powerful, this concept of survival of the fittest has had social and political implications. The right of the dominant to dominate. If it's a law of nature that the fit are empowered by their fitness, but I'm not going to get into that, although I think it's quite important. But at the beginning, let me say what I now believe to be wrong with the Neo-Darwinians failing to explain some of the outstanding issues facing biology. First of all, there's the concept of the holobiont. I believe it was coined by Eugene Rosenberg at Tel Aviv University, that individuals in effect are ecosystems living in a symbiosis, and we'll get into that. But the conclusion, or let's say what damages the Neo-Darwinian approach, is that the genotype is not equivalent. The inherited genotype is not the equivalent, or does not encode the phenotype. The phenotype of the individuals, we'll get more into it, is the product of a lot of independent genotypes. Another issue that the Neo-Darwinians don't explain very well is the evolving, or actually the acceleration of complexity. And as we'll see, the more complex is demonstrably less fit than the less complex. And so there's no Darwinian explanation of why evolution, after having developed prokaryotes, has bothered to go on with eukaryotes and multicellular organisms. Another clear, let's say, expression of biological systems is their universal cooperation, the interdependency of living systems. We'll get into that, and that is clearly a contradiction of the expectation of survival of the fittest. There's a problem of sexual reproduction, which leads to gene reshuffling that actually blocks the fittest organisms from endowing their offspring with their fit genes. The genes get reshuffled. And something that certainly Darwin was not prepared to come up with an understanding of programmed death. As we'll see, a great deal of our genetic endowment has to do with how cells and organisms kill themselves, which certainly doesn't suit survival of the fittest. As an immunologist, I was trained to see the immune system as being involved in protecting the autonomous self against the non-self. But now, with the appreciation, scientific American nature, that the individual is an ecosystem, the discovery of the microbiome, it's clear that the phenotype is a symbiotic self made of, there's the eukaryotic endowment from the heritage from the parents, but most of the DNA in our body is from the microbiome, the symbionts. And my own appreciation of the immune system is not a bulwark against self as opposed to foreign, but involved in certainly protection, but also repair and regulating this symbiosis. It's the system has the amazing capacity to deal with the pathogen in one way, and in the same gut deal with the symbionts, invite them in and actually protect them. So this is some of the things I want to get into. And I said, what drives complexity? Darwin said that struggle, survival of the fittest, he actually uses the term improvement, actually more than fitness in his first book. But really, who is more fit? We are the bacteria. And clearly, we have evolving complexity despite the fact that the most persistent of organisms are the prokaryotes. Different complex creatures come and go. In fact, a characteristic of evolution is mass extinctions from which bacteria essentially have been free of that bother. So we have the individual as an ecosystem, if we look into our present appreciation of how we are put together, it's clear that there is universally embedded cooperation. It's not that we just cooperate with other species in the ecosystem, but our very cells are formed by cooperative interactions between molecules. Cooperative interactions between cells lead to organisms. Cooperative interactions between organisms lead to species, ecosystems. So the whole structure of the biological world is based more on accommodation and cooperation than on struggle, dominance, and replacement. So rather than Darwin's linear tree from the lower to the higher, what we really see is that the life on Earth is a lattice of embedded cooperating systems, one within the other, and of course horizontal interactions between organisms within species, species within ecosystems. So this progressive so-called improvement, we see the accumulation of complexity, but we don't see replacement. We see that actually the cell, or at least the prokaryotic cell, is certainly more fit, more robust, in any way you look at it, than the more complex organism. And then sexual reproduction, as I said, thwarts the optimal genome, so whether mother or father has superior genes, the offspring are reshuffling, and one does not know ahead of time which genes, which of your children are going to get. And certainly sexual reproduction, which we see developing along with multicellular organism complexity, is something which is quite common, if not universal. And it certainly doesn't, it's not explained by Darwinian survival of the fittest and so-called reproductive success, because your own success is never a guarantee of your offspring's genetic or inherited genetic makeup, and certainly your offspring is formed by all kinds of symbionts and so on. The other thing is clearly an enormous amount of our genome is devoted to program death, and death is intrinsic to life. So if the Neo-Darwinian paradigm is unsatisfactory, at least to me, I think it should be unsatisfactory to most people. Where do we go from here? And let me quote Ernst Mayr, a representative of the synthesis, the Neo-Darwinian synthesis. He uses the term information, and I'm going to expand on that, but he gives a nice synthesis of how the Neo-Darwinians look at the evolution of life. On the one hand is the production and perfecting of ever new programs, of ever improved DNA codes of information, and as I said, certainly the Homo sapiens is hardly more improved than E. coli, but improved codes of information. On the other hand, there's the testing of these programs, genetic programs, and the decoding throughout the lifetime of the individual. That is essentially what I showed in a diagrammatic form on my second slide. But what I want to show is that if we take information and think about living systems from an informational point of view, we get a different outlook on evolution. Now I'm going to define information in a Shannon-like way by saying that an organized arrangement is information, and I'm going to accept Shannon's insight of the distinction between information and meaning. Let's say that an arrangement, as opposed to homogeneity or randomness, is equal to information. And in addition to the arrangements of living systems interact, and as I'd like to emphasize, if they don't interact, they don't survive. And interaction I define as meaning. So here I've taken something from the book by Warely, Tidying Up Art, in which he's decomposed various pictures, and we'll get to another picture. But this representation by Matisse can be decomposed to its basic forms. And clearly there's a great, although the arrangements are the same elements in different structures of the arrangements, it's clear that this has meaning to our brains because it interacts in a way that differs from the way that the other arrangement interacts with our brains. And I define the interactions of arrangements as meaning. And so the conclusion is living systems are made of organized arrangements. I don't think anybody can argue with that. So life is made of information. That terminology, I don't want it to imply more than it says. Living systems are organized arrangements. If your arrangements falter, you end up in intensive care. And then what happens later, whether you get reorganized or not. But it's clear that your ability to live in all living systems are the expressions of organized arrangements. So life is made of information. It's made of arrangements. And it's also interactive. It has meaning. What does interaction mean? An interaction is a meeting that leads to a change of state. I don't want to get into that, but that in itself needs some definition and discussion. But living systems are alive through their interaction. When they stop interacting, they're no longer alive. When does the brain come to homeostasis? We call it brain death. For the brain to be alive, it is interacting with the world around it, it's interacting with itself, it's in a dynamic state of transitions. You can call those transitions stable or not if you like, but when it reaches real stability, we call that brain death. So I want to say that rather than the Darwinian concept or the Neo-Darwinian concept of a struggle between genotypes expressed by their phenotypes, that the evolution of living systems, if we say a living system is made of information, can be fashioned by two feedback processes that affect information. First of all, arrangements fall apart. You can call that entropy, you can call it common experience, you can look at your desk and see that that order tends to dissipate spontaneously and by itself. So there's a negative feedback on information and on life of dissolution, dissipation. But at the same time, there's a positive feedback on information, which is more difficult to grasp in concept. I'll give some examples. But information or arrangements, by the very existence of a diversity in a certain threshold of concentration of arrangements, they will expand into complexity. And I'll give some examples when we go on. But if we take then this, the negative feedback, we can say arrangements tend to fall apart. They fall apart spontaneously. You can say they're driven by entropy, or they're driven by the more likelihood of a randomness than a structure. Depending, you can look at it as energy, or you can look at it as a disposition of living matter in space and time. But you don't have to supply any outside influence to get things to fall apart. They fall apart by themselves. On the other hand, if you want to breed arrangement from randomness, you've got to work. Now, it's interesting then. You can actually use the a natural force. In this case, the first example is the force of gravity. By coupling, if you couple the two weights, the heavier one, the one with greater mass, will actually raise the other one. So you can couple individually unlikely interactions or states of existence to those that are natural, and supply the energy, and actually coupled reactions in power life. We degrade the food that we ingest in order to drive the synthesis of the things that we need to live. So what evolution has done is develop life as a contrivance powered by entropy to build order by coupled interactions. And I think the sailboat is a wonderful living homey type example of how entropy can be captured. The force of dissolution can be captured to drive a structure with actually a purpose. If there's no wind, there's no navigation. But in order to navigate your vessel and get to home port, you need the wind, and you can even do it if the wind is against you. And the wind is no more than the expression of the dissipation of heat through the heating of different parts of the earth. And the wind is the prime example, everyday example of chaos. And yet, the design of a sail, the rudder, the intelligence of a sailor, the chaos can be harnessed to even steer the boat into the wind. And I think that's what life is doing. It's a contrivance powered by entropy to build order. Now, the second, let's say, implication of looking at information as, or life is made of information, is the second thing I said, the positive feedback element. Arrangements generate complications. So it's not fitness that drives evolving complexity, because we saw there's nothing more fit than a bacterium. Information per se, by itself, evolves more information. Information is autocatalytic, just as dissipation is autocatalytic, where dissipation or entropy is negative feedback. Information provides positive feedback. So the more initial information, the more opportunity for variation, the more the greater the concentration of arranged molecules or arranged cells or arranged organisms or arranged species, the more opportunity, the greater the landscape of information that can be exploited. I got these ideas from Henri Atlan, who some of you may know. Henri is also a physician, a biophysicist. He developed a simple idea that if you have a system where there's replication and different variation of the replicates, you can generate more net structure than you had if there is not. You don't have replication, you just have variation. You have one arrangement and you substitute it with another one, but if you have examples We have replication. By the way, you know that there's evidence for gene duplication is a major factor in evolution. So if you have a genome that has duplicated itself, then the old part continues to function, maintain the organism, and then the replicates can vary, can mutate, and so on, and enrich the whole process. So you can get autocatalysis, duplication, variation, and so on. Complex arrangements also have side effects. Here I'm taking an example of the spandrels of San Marco that Stephen Gould used. And it's something that in biology, it's very common that something may have evolved to satisfy one function. In this case, if you have you're building a cathedral and you have arches on top of arches, then you're going to get spandrels, which are areas between the arches. And the side effect of the adaptive structure of the cathedral then provides an opportunity for the church or the artist to engage in propaganda and exploit the space. So there are side effects that we don't anticipate, and certainly in biology, there is no single macromolecule that only participates in one interaction. We call it pleiotropism. So, and I'm reminded of, you may have heard of a molecule called cachexin. It was named, cachexin means it's associated with changes in metabolism that lead to humans to lose weight and become cachectic. And another molecule called tumor necrosis factor that was discovered by people who were looking at this, how this molecule causes necrosis of tumors. And now we know that they're precisely the same molecule. They got different names because they had different histories of discovery, and probably the same molecule evolved in its own. We don't know the history of evolution. We can find, let's say, primordial molecules of a similar sequence in early creatures and bacteria and so on, where they perform totally different functions. Or the same molecule in the immune system does a whole series of things. It's got a whole bunch of different names. During development, it's doing other things. So this is typical of living systems, what appears to us to be a plausible explanation of why the vervets have this call and that call. We have no idea how the calls evolved. I don't believe a vervet knows what a snake is or an eagle. But there are a series of interactions that lead to networks of interactions. So this pleiotropism, you can see how a single structure can have side effect interactions, and how you can then get chains of continuing interactions and increasing complexity. And you need interaction, you need meaning, you need tending to preserve complexity. As I said, you can look at your desk, or you can look at what's left over that used to the bare Irun choirs where late the sweet birds sang by Shakespeare, and this is what we have today when the community doesn't tend the cathedral anymore. That's what happens. Now, I think the difference now between biology and physics is exemplified by this deconstruction of a pointillist painting by Seurat, again by Verily in his book of Tidying Up Art. This picture of the three models, or one model in three different poses, is made by points of primary color. There are only primary colors in dots, And the arrangement of those dots provides us with a meaningful picture. We know that these are ladies and they influence our thinking in one way or the other. In fact, they're in a room decorated by another pointillist painting by Seurat, which in all these cases rarely decomposes them to their fundamental particles. But that decomposition, understanding the physics of what is inside of these arrangements, does not explain the arrangements or what they do. So life as an arrangement, differentiation, heterogeneity, interaction, and meaning on the one hand, and we have entropy, dissolution, homogeneity, and we have happy physicists when they're able to get to the underlying matter from which this is constructed. But as biologists, understanding everything we can understand, there is to understand about the dots of paint, do not afford any explanation from our frame of reference relating to a lady. So I say that my disappointment with the Neo-Darwinian outlook, we can put in, or at least I propose to put in, entropic selection, the ability of life to survive, or living systems can only survive their own dissolution by certain strategies which allow, subsequent to those strategies, then we can see environmental selection. We get an output of surviving systems, surviving species, that then vary, and there's this iteration through a filter of what I call entropic selection, which is primary and holds sway over the environment and any kind of a struggle. So the real challenge of life is to run with entropy, or to keep moving. If we look at the wolf of entropy, the inexorable dissolution, destruction of arrangement, and life as the embodiment of arrangement, then life has to keep running with this process of its own dissolution. And I think that the outcomes of entropic selection, at least for me, explain certain aspects that Darwin has failed to deal with. One is the real function of DNA. Now, I'm going to compress a whole talk into a very short shrift. But if we look at DNA as core information, and actually DNA by itself is inert, it's isolated. As you'll see, it's interacting only with itself, but it's the state of the cell, kinetic interaction, networks and pathways that then can access potential information in DNA and turn it into actual translations of and proteins. And then what interacts with the environment are the emergent properties. So maybe more of this will become clear. If we look at, say, DNA compared to RNA, DNA is like a crystal. The two strands are interacting, one strand with the other, and it's essentially it's free of the capacity to create new bonds. RNA, messenger RNA, which is a single strand, has a lifetime of, let's say, minutes. It could be hours. Rare cases, it could be days. DNA, as you know, can be tell us about the Neanderthal, can tell us from the scene of the crime. It's an extremely stable structure, stable amount of information that is isolated. It's a core, and it's accessed by the state of the cell, the history of the cell, and the state of the environment, and so on. So we can get some appreciation of the importance of stable core information, because this is much more resistant to the dissipation by entropy than this. And in fact, there's so much heat generated when the two strands combine that it more than pays its debt to entropic disorder in the universe by actually creating a stable structure that can be called upon by the cell. There's not enough time to get into this core information. We have DNA, but once we get a cell, the cell becomes the core information for the emergent property we call an organism. Collective of organisms, we get a species. Collective of species, we get an ecosystem. So we get this iteration of the creation of core information that then is used to expand complexity. The problem of death, of course, is that it's much better to preempt the random death inflicted by the bite of the wolf of entropy with organized death, rather than waiting for elements, molecules, or cells to poison the organism. It's much better that their time to replace themselves. So we have apoptosis, necrosis, autophagy, immune killing. A quarter of the genome is related to self-destruction, which has no expectation in survival of the fittest. We also hold off the wolf with diversity, mass production. We avoid the optimum, whereas the Darwinians, Meyer and Dawkins, talk about the gene using the organism. Actually, the organism makes certain that the genes are reshuffled, that diversity reigns in the species. And we talked about sexual reproduction, which avoids the optimum. Darwin said evolution strives to achieve the optimum. From the point of view of evading entropy, evolution strives to avoid the optimum by continuous reshuffling, turnover. Making families allows us to restart and deal with the wolf. There's something, there's uncertainty in the way the genetic networks, molecular networks, cellular networks are put together. That is also built in. This uncertainty makes the structure of the living system much more resistant to entropic dissolution, because you can get from input to output by various different pathways, and we know you can knock out genes and don't see any change in phenotype. This polygenetic emergence, as I call it, is really demonstrated very well in Barcelona. The survival of a football team depends on making goals. That's the emergent property that leads to fitness, so-called survival versus death. And yet, no single goal is ever made in exactly the same way. We know what a goal is, we know what the rules are, but the same team will never make the same goal in the same way. And the same thing with biologic systems. You perturb a culture, a mono culture of yeast or bacteria, they'll all survive, but if you look into the way they're expressing genes, each one does it differently. And of course, the holobiont, the prokaryotes actually combine together to give eukaryotes. We have the collective organism, species, ecosystem. The whole biosphere is based not on struggle, domination, and replacement, but actually on cooperation. So the views of evolution were the natural selection life's program is DNA, the driving force is competition, the vehicle is the individual, the strategy is a zero-sum game. Evolutionary biologists love to invoke game theory. We heard some game theory today. And the outcome is optimal individuals dominate the species, new species by different environments, whatever. The anthropist selection, we see that the program is the dynamic state of the cell, including its DNA. DNA is only an element which is passive until it is accessed by what else is going on. We have the driving force is information, is positive feedback and negative feedback, guys, is the vehicle is the species rather than the individual. The species is a frequency distribution of different alleles which recombined into different individuals allows the species to deal with and thrive in a particular environment. The strategy, instead of a zero-sum game, we accommodate the entropy. It's a win-win game, cooperation, diversity, gene reshuffling, organized death, restart, not survival of the fittest, survival of the fitted. And we get increasing the complexity. We'll leave Freud for another talk. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So I think we have now 15 minutes for questions. So please raise your hand. Yeah.
Oh, great, thank you. A lot of interesting stuff there. I mean, I'm curious to what extent you want to insist on there being some kind of fundamental incompatibility between the two views you just put on the last slide there before this one, because I mean, it looks like either one taken in isolation and extended across the board is inadequate. So I mean, for example, the kind of entries in your second column here on the entropic selection, I mean, where do we fit things like intragenomic conflict and all of the kinds of cases where it looks like
conflict is a word, and I mean what appears to be conflict and competition at one level is, if you look at another level, it's cooperation. Let's take the host parasite. We say, or the snakes and or the predator and the prey. We know that if all the prairie dogs are going to survive, it's the end of the prairie dogs. We know that the prairie dogs are signaling the wolves to come and cull the aged, the sick, and the surplus young. So when a prairie dog of the right kind is taken by the wolf, the prairie dogs survive. We see the problem, you've seen the wonderful results of reintroducing the wolves into Yellowstone. You should all see that. Here's an example where the removal of a predator, the struggle for existence itself, fashions the natural environment and all the biologic environment. So what are you going to say? The elk that escapes the wolf is more fit than the elk which is taken by the wolf? Or the species of elks that signal the wolves to take the maimed, the debilitated, the aged, and the sick is the way that the species maintains itself, or the lions and the zebras, whatever you want. So you say there is conflict between genetic loci. You import the concept from the Darwinian paradigm, which is fine. Darwin is a great genius. But I think we need a more tempered look at what is actually going on. I think we need an ecological look, and Fred Tauber can talk about reinterpreting the immune system as an ecological system. So we have these terms, fitness, which nobody really ever defines, except for saying you have more fit children. We all know that that's That's not true. Whales, no matter how fit they are, they never have more than so many whales. And mosquitoes have their own lifestyle. And the procreative ability of the individual serves the lifestyle of a species which has evolved, as I've said, to allow the species to survive its own dissipation and to come to terms with its own complexity. So it's your frame of reference and the vocabulary you bring to the table. And I'm making a plea that we think about different vocabularies and we have a greater appreciation of the depth and the breadth of the frame of reference that biology should look at the biosphere.
Okay. Yeah. I'm not sure if this is something that was talked about in the workshop that I missed, but it seems to me that a lot of the roles of information in biology, of the sort that you're talking about, suggest a need for a distinction between the notion of information that philosophers mostly discuss, where there's truth and falsity, and something quite different, which is control information, what to do. And there may not be any notion of it being true or false, but whether the thing is done or not done, that's important, and how it's done, and then the what and how and all sorts of variations can provide more and more complex types of control information. And I think that's what you're talking about.
I agree.
That doesn't necessarily disagree with anyone, but it's often not pointed out in discussions of information.
Thank you.
Okay, Michael?
Yeah. Thank you. It was a very interesting talk. And I think, doing an evolutionary theory that really is able to deal with groups of genes, groups of individuals inside what we call a single individual is really important. And one thing that I wonder is, let's say we have, like you say, the prairie dogs or the zebras, and you say they present the wolf or the lion with their
They signal.
yeah.
They provide a signal.
But how do they know to give the sick to the lion instead of the well-to-do? How do they know that it's better to give the sick to the lion for the species, as you say, than to give the well-to-do to the lion? One is better for the species than the other, but how was that learned?
I think these are things we have to look at the history of the evolution. I don't think the vervets got together and said we have three cries, let's assign one to a snake. The vervet doesn't know what a snake is, he doesn't know what an eagle is. He has, for example, my kids when they were young used to love to raise puppies, and you could take the puppy when the puppy was blind and raise it at home, and that puppy never saw a dog and never saw a cat, and a few months later, at a distance of 50 or 100 meters, the young dog would know what a dog is and how to behave and would know what a cat is without ever having seen one. So there are various levels of discovery and learning which are imprinted, represented in a way, in the way the creature is put together. There are other levels which are learned. And we have to open, I think it's good to take different perspectives and raise new questions. Okay, how do these things come about? I think, where did the vervet calls come from? Not from, oh, here's a snake, I'm going to say this. The vervet doesn't know what a snake is. The call has nothing to do with the snake. So where did it come from? Can we find in other species of earlier vervets, they were using communications for other things? We have to look at these things from an ecological point of view, a group point of view, not Darwin's autonomous, individual, aristocratic, colonial, but an ecological system that has developed, and rightfully we can ask, how can these complicated things, how do they develop? Where do they come from? What advantage do they provide? How do they overcome the dissolution of the system that is inevitable? How do they keep the species able to turn over all its individuals? How it keeps the individuals able to turn over all its cells and all its molecules at different time points, and yet keep a, let's say conceptually, the cell, the individual, the organism, the species living for a certain appointed time to keep what I would call the species going, or the ecosystem.
So I also have a question. There's no question. So I wasn't. That's a clarificatory question, I guess. So I wasn't sure whether you were. I mean, at the beginning, I thought that you would like to challenge the idea that fitness drives, complexity, or drives the evolution of living systems. But then at the end, you seem to be arguing against the Darwinian package, right? So the Darwinian, which includes many other things, like cellular DNA, individuals. I mean, all these kind of things. And I wasn't completely sure which way you were going. Concerning I mean, if you're criticizing this Darwinian package, I think I completely agree with that. But if you, the first project seemed to be perhaps.
I have to take you step by step.
Yeah.
Okay, we start with one thing, but I end up with the whole package.
But the thing about the first speech of fitness, like one of the things that I think Michael showed was that there's a connection between fitness and measures of information. So there's a way of capturing.
No, I don't think so.
Okay.
I don't know what fitness is. Fitness from whose point of view? From the zebra who's about to be eaten by the lion, by the herd, by the species of zebras? What looks like unfitness from one frame of reference is fitness from another frame of reference. If we take so-called bad genes, the Jews have certain hereditary diseases. Why do they keep bearing those genes? Well, we don't know what else they do. We don't know the fitness value of a gene, because in a certain genome it leads to early death. That same gene in another genome may lead to performance on the stock market or whatever. I don't know what it does. So the whole concept of fitness is something that is really never defined, other than by giving a number or by showing a fitness landscape. If this creature is here and that creature is there, who will climb somewhere else? Okay, you can generate game theory strategies. If it's like this, it's like that. But what is fitness? Fitness is you have to define who you're talking about. What is evolution making more fit? The gene, the individual, a species, an ecosystem, and then you have to say, okay, what looks like a detriment, a punishment, and from one aspect is what makes one of the elements that allows the whole system to maintain itself. Despite the fact, I mean, why do zebras get old and sick and die? Because the living systems fall apart. Now, if you let all those sick zebras waste all the grass, you're going to put an end to the zebras. So they signal the lions. By the way, you see those great African films. The lions are there out in the open, and the zebras and the gazebos or whatever, they're grazing around like nothing happened. When the lion is hungry, what does the lion do? The lion roars. The zebras, what do? They start jumping. Instead of clearing out, they start jumping up and down, and they clearly show the lions who is worth culling from the pack without losing any teeth or breaking any bones. So everybody's happy. But the zebras live perfectly well with the lions after the lions are fed. And the lions live perfectly well with the zebras as long as the zebras keep telling them who to kill, and everybody's happy. So you can say, well, it's a fitness problem. All of the zebras that got eaten are unfit. The herd is fit. The dead zebras are unfit. So how are you going to define fitness?
There's a term that you used and that I'm not clear about. I mean, you characterize life as a contrivance powered by entropy to build order, and you used the term order. You illustrated it in various ways, but I'm not sure what order is. Of course.
Order's like fitness. I'm not sure what it is either.
Term, of order, and of course, it's easy to convince us by using our aesthetic preferences or our habits or our other sorts of preferences. For example, you showed this matrix where half is, I don't know, yellow and the other is white and the other one. But I'm not sure in what sense really, if you go into this, in what sense is one of them more ordered than the other. And so I think this very notion, if you start from it, hides some very heavy assumptions
I agree.
that lie below all this.
I agree. I totally agree.
Say more about order.
I would put it this way, that I would define as order as something that you have to make an effort to achieve. And I would define disorder as what happens by itself.
Well, you had this very, that picture that made me think more about this, which is the Sera and the Rowley's decomposition.
Yeah.
So
I don't know how to navigate this. I'm a
but
Mac
you know
person.
what I'm
Yeah, I
talking
know.
about. It's great. I never saw this work, and it's beautiful.
You should see the book. It's terrific. Tidying up art.
Okay, I'll use it from now on. I mean, it's a very good illustration for the area. And you said that the original picture is biology, and the decomposed one is physics in some sense, which is, of course, it's not very precise, but I hope I got the idea there.
I wouldn't say that in front of physicists, but
I am one.
oh, excuse me.
but I think it's an interesting observation, but it must be made more precise, and the term order it's evocative.
Absolutely.
Be careful. It's not clear that the Shoah painting is more ordered in some sense.
It's more order in that it interacts with us in the way that the bag of dots does not interact with us.
And the bag can interact with other systems in
Absolutely.
a well-defined, very regular
Absolutely.
way. So it's not an objective.
No, it's a frame of reference, which physicists like to talk about anyway.
And I was suspecting that it hides some subjective preference, and so
No
this is
question about it.
Yeah, okay.
Okay, so I think we're out of time, so let's hang out speaker.